Hello, welcome. My name is Juan. I'm a guide for the Central Park Conservancy. Welcome on today's weekly walk where we will be exploring the northern forts in the northern section of the park. I know that for many of you, I might not be a familiar face, but last time I led a weekly walk was in June of last year. We have all of our previous weekly walks archived on our YouTube channel. Our tour is going to be approximately 15 minutes long. I have my colleagues, Jose, Ian, and Ryan on the back end helping with our engagement. If you have any questions, feel free to let them know. Let's proceed with our slide presentation here. Our mission here at the Central Park Conservancy is to preserve and celebrate Central Park as a sanctuary from the pace and pressures of city life, enhancing the enjoyment and well-being of all. On behalf of everyone at the Conservancy, we once again welcome you. Before we proceed, a little bit of housekeeping. As you know and are familiar, we are using Zoom as an interface. You can use the chat feature to say hello, let us know where you are tuning in from. At the end of the tour, I'll look through those comments to see who I connected with. We have visitors from all over the world, visitors from the surrounding neighborhoods of the park, and even colleagues of mine as well. Welcome, everyone. If you have a specific question about anything in particular, use the Q&A feature, and my colleagues on the back end will help you find answers to any questions that you might have. I'll also be sharing links to upcoming programs, helping you better connect to the experience that is Central Park. The photos that you'll be seeing today were taken by me last Saturday, and they also come from our archival collections here at the Conservancy, the collections of the New York Public Library, the New York Historical Society, and the Wildlife Conservation Society. If I'm missing one, you'll see it cited at the bottom of the image if it's a historical image. This is the landscape that we are going to explore, the northern section of the park. I know that a lot of you live in the surrounding neighborhoods, but I would like to know a little bit of the demographic that I have. Which areas of the park have you visited? I'll be launching a poll, and this poll will pop up on your screen, and you'll be able to select from the choices available. Let's see. So yes, what section of Central Park do you visit most often? The poll has launched. And you can choose the southern end, the middle of the park, or the northern end. It will be interesting to see and find out who is tuning in today. I will give it a few more seconds as well for the poll to finish. In the meantime, let us move along a little bit, and then I'll share those poll results. If you don't want the poll on your screen, you can just exit out and you'll come back to the images. I'll just end it in a few seconds. Now, why do we have Central Park in the middle of Manhattan? This is something that we often go over, and we communicate this so to accentuate that there wasn't always a New York with a Central Park and public spaces for that matter for its residents to enjoy. Over here, the next slide here features an image that was created in the early 20th century depicting the crowded living conditions in Lower Manhattan. There were no public spaces, and people actually ventured to cemeteries to get away from the crowded conditions of the city. City officials got together and started putting resources so to create a Central Park for everyone's enjoyment. A competition was announced. A Central Park was built using a democratic process, and these two gentlemen won in the design competition: Frederick Law Olmsted to the left and Calvert Vaux to the right-hand side. They designed Central Park. This is the design that they submitted. It's called the Greensward Plan. It took them about 15 years to develop. And people didn't necessarily have to wait 15 years to enjoy it, because soon after construction began in 1858, a section of the park had already opened. Now, the northern section of the park where we are today is very special because the original design, this here, the Greensward Plan, only went from 59th Street on the southern end all the way up to 106th Street. The park today goes up to 110th Street. And that's because in 1863, something interesting happened. This is when those 4 extra blocks were added. And that addition directly relates to the landscape, to the land, to what is natural to this part of the world. And to understand this topography, I have a couple more images that I'll share before we venture into the park in this very special section of it in the northern end here in the northeast corner. That is where we are going to enter. Now, to understand a little bit about the topographical dynamics of this area of the park, let us look at this map that comes to us from the Wildlife Conservation Society, wonderful organization that has endeavored to map out Manhattan from the time before before Europeans arrived to this part of the world. And this map depicts the topography of the island. As you can see, it's very hilly. In fact, the name Manhattan is the name that Native Americans gave to this part of the world. To them, Manhattan meant island of many hills. And we can see those hills, but we can see that there's special characteristics to these hills. There's a big chunk on the southern section of the island, and another big chunk in the northern edge, and this break over here, roughly in the northern section where a creek runs through. And then you have this ridge here as well. Very high cliffs, very difficult territory to develop. This is Central Park superimposed on this map, and you can see that this last section here would have been difficult to develop because of that very hilly topography and those natural waterways that were the natural attributes of this landscape. Park officials pretty much decided to incorporate them into the design because it was going to be very expensive to develop, and people wouldn't really want to develop in this very difficult topography. It's so much the case that all along this ridge, we have parks today. We have, just north of Central Park, we have Morningside Park. Further north, we have St. Nicholas Park, Jackie Robinson Park, and all the way up and towards the end of the island, we have Highbridge Park. I know that a lot of you, as I mentioned, are tuning in from New York. I would like to launch another poll and see if anyone has visited any of these parks. Let me see. And I promise that I'll be sharing the results along the way. The poll is launching, it's multiple choices, so feel free to choose any of those 4 parks listed and if you haven't, I encourage you to visit because it can help you connect a bigger picture of the natural attributes of this amazing island. Manhattan is spectacular. I see results are coming in. We have about, 400 participants. Again, let us know in the comments section where you are tuning in from. If you're watching in the future on YouTube, let us know in the comments section there. All right, I see that some results are coming in still. Let's end the poll and share the results. There you go. So in this group, this is a rough estimate of who in this group has visited these other spaces. Morningside Park is the winner, 92%, or not the winner, but the most popular. St. Nicholas Park, 28%. Jackie Robinson Park, 14% of you, and Highbridge Park, 27%. Those of you who have visited these parks, you might know that there are very cool things to explore on top of these cliffs in these other parks. I won't go into what you can explore at those spaces because we're going to explore what there is to see in these bluffs, in these cliffs that we have within the confines of Central Park. Now, these rocks, these hills, the top of these hills have an incredible historical significance because they were also of incredible military importance. And that relates to the time when Americans were engaged in conflict with the British in the 18th century and later on in the 19th century. Because of the views, especially that you get from the top of these mounds, the strategic military outposts were organized in the form of fortresses and blockhouses. We have record of how the fortresses that were built here looked like at the time of that conflict in the 19th century. How they look at the time when they were occupied by the British, unfortunately, we don't have references to those. Most of the images that were created at the time of the War of 1812. So we'll explore some of that. And by the way, this presentation today is only 15 minutes and it's basically an exploration of of a larger event that we have, a virtual tour that is 45 minutes long. This is our route that we're going to follow. You're going to see that it's sort of fast-paced. We're checking out the landscape, see what there is to see. Again, I took these images just about 3 days ago on Saturday. We're gonna enter on the northeastern corner of the park, which happens to be called Pioneers Gate. Many of you might already know or learned of other gates that we have in the park. We have a total of 20 named entrances to the park. Pioneers, very apropos because I'm going to show you a space that was in all probability frequented or traversed by pioneers in colonial times and in the 19th century as well. This is the entrance. As you can see, we are confronted with a beautiful landscape of the second largest body of water in the park. And there's a lot to see. I want to direct our attention to this sign that we see to the right-hand side. It's part of our Share Your Story exhibit, where people using the hashtag MyCentralPark share messages of what the park means to them. This one here from Bird Central Park communicated that the beauty of birds is a reassuring constant that can be found on every visit to the park. And I find that to be very, very accurate, very, very true. We're going to step in a wider view of this very special lake. It's called the Harlem Meer. Meer is a Dutch word that means lake. So very apropos and in direct connection to this neighborhood, Harlem in northern Manhattan. Unfortunately, this is a landscape that didn't always look like this. The Conservancy is the nonprofit that since 1980 has been taking care of the park. And at the time we came in, the whole park was in disrepair. This is how this mere looked, with a building that on its edge that had burned down, unfortunately, in the second half of the 19th century. It was restored, and today the Meer is a viable ecosystem home to different varieties of birds and even fish as well. This plaque attached to this vicinity where we find ourselves honors the memory or reminds us of Sissy Patterson, a journalist who was one of the first donors to the restoration of the upper part of the park. You can learn of ways that you yourself can contribute by checking out our website. My colleague Jose is going to drop the link in the comments section, and you can check it out when we are done. Now we're walking further south along the Meer, and already we can see those bluffs. We can see that topography where those fortresses are situated. And notice the land as well. It's a sand, and that's because this is a different access point, creating variety and creating this picturesque setting that animals love, and even children as well, playing around here in the sand. And a reminder as well of the marshland that this area used to be before the development of the park. You can see this waterway running through it. This used to be the Harlem Creek, which was basically pretty much eliminated or redeveloped in order to create the Harlem Meer on this northern section of the park. We're going to move along, and now we're going to look at, we're going to keep walking along the Meer on its southern edge and look north. But before we do that, again, a closer look at those rocks, incredibly big, and on top of them is where those fortresses are situated. From this vantage point, we can see an American flag marking Fort Clinton, where we are going to finish our walk in a few moments. Rocks have been redeveloped or reconfigured in order to accommodate for the park, and sometimes you can see evidence of that as you walk along these promenades and as you get close to those rocks as well. Directing our attention north, we can see the Charles A. Dana Discovery Center, one of the 5 visitor centers in the park, and closer to us, you see people fishing. Fishing is allowed here at the Meer and other bodies of water in the park. It's catch and release, however. Whatever you catch, you have to release back. From within the Dana, we have a very special view of the landscape that we are exploring. There's also an exhibit at the gallery space where I'm actually situated right now. This is how the view was looking a couple of days ago, again on Saturday. And this is a superimposition of how those fortresses looked when they were part of this landscape in the 19th century. We're going to walk toward where this gatehouse used to be located. And this is a depiction of how it looked at the time of the War of 1812. We're going to move along. We're going to get to that gatehouse. And that gatehouse protected the entrance to New York, in essence. This cliff, this ridge on the northern section of Manhattan, at this particular location, was one of two access points to New York City, a trail that was originally established by Native Americans, and then Europeans, when they arrived here, they used it in the event that they, for example, maybe wanted to head from the southern section of the city all the way up to Albany. The other trail was what today is Broadway Avenue. This one was called the Kingsbridge Road because it led to the Kings Bridge over at the top of Manhattan, connecting to the Bronx. And also you see a delineation of the fortresses that were built here, again, at that time during the War of 1812. This is how where the gatehouse used to be looks today. And this is a historical image that depicts how the gatehouse itself looked. As you can see, it was a gatehouse, it was an entranceway. Whoever controlled this space over here controlled access to the lower settlements and to pretty much New York City in the lower section of Manhattan. George Washington used this gateway to begin his procession into New York City after the British left New York in 1783 after the War of Revolution ended. It's a very, very special location with incredible historical significance. And the gatehouse in this vicinity also hosted a tavern that allowed for weary travelers to find respite. And in 1885, this image here shows you how that tavern used to look. This is not the original tavern that was built here. This was built in the the original tavern was built in the 1740s, and then in subsequent years, other owners came about, and by 1881, it actually burned down, and by 1885 is when we end up with this building here, which was in operation in the park as a refreshment house up until 1917. Mcgowan's Tavern, named for Elizabeth Mcgowan, who was one of the earlier businesswomen who established this tavern for weary travelers in the 18th century. She established her tavern in the 1760s, at the time we were a colony of the British. Historical research and archaeological work has revealed the remnants of the Kingsbridge Road, different sized pebbles, and even the foundations of the gatehouse can be found at this territory here where we find ourselves. We're now headed to our last stop. We're headed to Fort Clinton, one of 3 fortresses that we have in this vicinity. Again, for the others, I invite you to that upcoming virtual tour coming up on March 16th. I'll share the link to that. It's closer to the end of the program. These are the steps that are going to take us there. Notice the beautiful elm tree to the left-hand side. I find it amazing. When you get to the top of these steps, this is the view. You can see that these trees are pretty much growing directly on top of rocks. There's very little topsoil on top of these rocks. Now, as we walk down this promenade, we will be surprised to find that things are already blooming in the park. These are Lenten flowers, very appropriate for the season. They are also called hellebores, and they are a symbol of spring, a symbol of renewal, and several other things as well. So if you find yourself venturing in this landscape, make sure to look for those hellebores, or again, Lenten flowers. We get to the top of Fort Clinton and we see that the space is marked by this cannon, which was gifted to the park in 1765. It's not only a cannon, it also has a cannonade and cannon that were salvaged from a shipwreck that happened in 1780, 3 years before the Revolutionary War ended. This was one of the British naval ships that were in this part of the world for that conflict. The ship, the HMS Hussar, sank, and about 80 years later, several things were salvaged from it because people believed that there was gold in the ship as well. But very special, incredible historical significance, as especially this cannonade was a new military weapon at the time in the 19th century. Now, these are the views that we get from Fort Clinton, and with these views, we can imagine and envision why the British and later Americans chose this as a strategic military operation. This is looking west. Notice the beautiful evergreen trees that are part of this landscape. We restored this area in 2014. Notice to the south as well, southeast, actually, we would have been able to see the East River back in the day when there were no buildings here. Notice the lawn just up in front, a lawn that not very long ago was being heavily used by snowboarders and people sledding as well. And as you see, the lawn has completely deteriorated, but within a couple of weeks, it'll be back to its former glory. And to learn of the work that goes into restoring our expansive lawns in the park, I invite you to a program entitled Restoring the Central Park's Expansive Lawns. It's one of our Behind the Park series productions where you can learn of the work that goes into taking care of the different attributes of the park. Again, this is looking south and this is looking east. Notice the rustic fencing and the rustic seating as well, enhancing the naturalistic aspect of this setting. And the view looking north, a beautiful expansive view of where we started our tour over in the northeast corner of the park over at Pioneers Gate. So we have completed our walk. I want to thank everyone for tuning in today. This is the map. I want to invite you to our virtual tour, which will debut on next week on Tuesday. We're going to enter on 7th Avenue, Warriors Gate, as it happens to be called, and finish over at Fort Clinton. You can also have a lot of this information on the palm of your hand by downloading the Bloomberg Connect app, and it features information of several different landscapes throughout the park. From everyone at the Conservancy, I want to thank you for your attention. Stay safe and be well. Bye-bye.